passion and connection, and human connections to things of social injustice and causes for change. These three are three areas that tend to have some of the highest intensity of triggering off that emotional intelligence type of reaction. And so if you have the skills, it might trigger off things in the long run that are very productive. But if it just triggers the emotion and the person doesn't have the skills, that's often why they're in our offices, because it causes problems in their lives, is that they have these rushes of emotions, but they don't know how to identify them, how to manage them, and it tends to cause problems for them. So all of it circles around the same piece. So the last couple of things, and then we're going to go get lunch. So as we talked about before, EI has 4 components. So that idea of perceiving emotions and being accurate in knowing what they actually are. Then reasoning with emotions. So that ability to filter the emotion in the way that you make good choices, because so even if you're experiencing that secondary emotion of anger, that you are doing the work to perceive it accurately, you realize I'm really frustrated. And then that realization allows you to take the actions that are appropriate for frustration, which is very different than if you figure out the anger is because you felt vulnerable or humiliated or, other kinds of things. Those are going to take other reactions, but you have to do the accurate perceiving and then reasoning with the emotions to figure them out first, because the next thing that we see here is if you look at this woman, my guess is if I had all of you write down what you think each of the faces reflects in terms of emotions, or I had you write, number 1 to 6 and write them down, there'd be a variance amongst us. There would not be complete agreement, because each one of us are going to look at these and see it differently in those nuances. And that's where people get caught, is that they don't explore the nuances. They want a big global answer. As I said, like anger, I'm pissed off. But no, there's all these nuances underneath. So, the first one here is the one that a lot of times when I have everybody do it just on the first one, you get this massive range of ideas because, some people say the person is extraordinarily frustrated. But other people will say, no, the person's so incredibly elated. Those two things are as different as night and day, folks, but different folks in the behavioral health field, you all, me, will look at that and have completely different ideas of what that affect means. And so it's that piece of figuring it out for ourselves and then hopefully reflecting what emotions we're feeling in a way that other people can perceive accurately, so that then the next part, which is managing the interaction, is based on what's really happening emotionally there. But for us as human beings, and particularly for a lot of the clients we work with, it doesn't go that way. In many cases, most of their problems are that they get in interactions with other people and there are these misunderstandings and it blows out of proportion or even becomes volatile. That's, those are the things where EI can be so important and kind of like recalibrate for people. And so when we look at people with high EI, there's some characteristics of folks that have a higher EI score. The first one is they tend to be more accepting of themselves and others, wonderful things that they love about each other, themselves, as well as things that they see as, I wish this wasn't quite the way it was. Everything across that spectrum. They tend to be able to communicate assertively, effectively through assertiveness, not hostility, not anger, not control, not aggressiveness, but assertiveness. And they tend to display empathy consistently across all their interactions with with other people, as well as having some level of, empathy and consideration for themselves too, giving themselves, I'm so stupid is not what's going to come out of someone as their EI goes up. The frame of reference might have been that, or, whoa, I didn't know that. That would have made a difference in the decision I made, which is very different than I'm so stupid. Now, people with lower EI, and remember the good news with EI, folks, is that you can develop it. But folks with lower EI, they tend to not be very accepting of others and themselves. They are much more rigid and cast as to what's okay, not okay, what causes disconcertion in them or upset. They're much more rigid, less flexible. They tend to use either passive or more passive aggressive communication styles. And that often comes from that frustration that what they're doing is not working to get them what they need emotionally. I mean, what they need in a healthy way emotionally. And often they are more self-absorbed. They are less connected, less empathy, compassion, and general humanity. They tend to see the world through how things affect me much more than people with higher EI. And so one of the big EI underpinnings is that, the first thing is to be empathetic and kind, and that it's not about being right all the time. It's about coming to, a place of, that's equally comfortable for everybody. And that doesn't mean that I don't have to be right, which means I would automatically have to make somebody else be wrong. It's about a meeting in the kind of the meeting of the minds. So you'll see here, I print this out for my clients on an 8.5 by 11. That's why I, like to give you all these things electronically so you can do the same thing. But this is one of the things when I'm teaching EI to my clients, that I actually print this out as an 8.5 by 11 handout, and I give it to them. And I say, when we're talking in our meetings together and in groups and things like that, I'm going to constantly bring you back to these 4 things and ask you, so I would like you to tell me, in the situation you're recounting, regardless of what the outcome was, how well did you do these 4 things? I often give them the same Likert scale I gave you on that other exercise. I'll say, on a 1 to 10, in this situation you were in, regardless of how it got resolved, how well on that scale do you think you did? And go through each one of these 4 things, because that helps them have some sense of where they really want to and need to improve over time. So then the other 2 are understanding emotions and how powerful they can be, particularly if I'm mislabeling my own emotions and I'm conveying what I need inaccurately. And then when I don't get what I actually do need, then that can promote more strong emotions because now I'm frustrated on top of it. And going back and looking at, is the issue not that you're not giving me what I need in terms of support, but maybe I'm not conveying what I need in a way that you can even support me in the way you need to. And all of those is about, practicing this, and really understanding and valuing how much it can make a difference for the person in terms of the quality of their life. And then managing them. So now we're in a situation where I'm either feeling strongly or I'm with somebody else or a group of people. And, there's this dynamic going on. How do I manage my emotions in a way that I can present them as not right and all the rest of you are wrong, but just that this is how I'm experiencing the situation. And then being able to talk about what I need as part of my experience of the situation for my part of moving forward. All of these. So these are the big 4 for EI. And so when we look at these, this is what I really talk to, the folks I work with around it's about, first of all, being self-aware. Then second of all, being able to self-regulate, to manage your emotions, no matter how strong they are, that you have management strategies, which some would call coping skills, to make sure those don't take a situation and make it worse for you or others. Having social skills. So knowing, how do I, first of all, where do I end and where do you begin? Second of all, how do I breach that gap in a way that's beneficial to both of us in the relationship? Then empathy, and then motivation, that I truly believe it's important to do this effectively because I truly want to have positive connections to others. And you're going to be working with some people where that's hard to start with. I mean, if I'm working with someone with major depressive disorder, their motivation to be better connected with others might seem just too overwhelming and exhausting. And at that point, they can't see that connection is actually likely to help alleviate some of the symptoms that are saying that that's too exhausting to do. So that you get that that teleology, that negative feedback loop, and breaking that sometimes even in small pieces to help people see that working on this piece will actually help, kind of ameliorate or alleviate some of the contributing factors, the, kind of the relational factors that often bring them into our offices. Because they often people, not just clients, human beings as a whole, think we know what the problem is. The problem here is, let's see here. The problem here is that Ruth is just so difficult. She's always wedded to her own opinion. She doesn't ever want to listen to what anybody else has to say. And she's not open for discussion. And so now every time I have a conversation with Ruth, I'm going to pre-defend myself to the fact that she's not going to listen to anything I have to say anyway. Well, here we go. There's, there is the beginning of the end of any possibility this is going to go well. But I may not be able to see this part of it that's mine, that I'm now bringing to the interactions with Ruth, that are actually exacerbating the problems. And when you think about things like family dynamics, couples relationships, parental child relationships, a lot of times they get into those cycles where they completely abdicate that any of it is about them and their reactions and their interactions, and it's all the other person. Well, once you get to that place, your chance of changing things reduces drastically. And that's where, we have to really target right into the EI, because that's where those skills come from, is right in the EI. And so, this piece on the left here of, the emotional baggage claim, and the potential spouse or partner says, I'll get yours if you carry your mother's. And we have to remember, we are all the products of intergenerational training, folks. There are some things I do that are least healthy and most healthy in my life that come from 3 generations back, from people I don't even know that passed it on to the next generation, And so the question becomes, do I become the person in this generation, or one of them, that keeps the stuff that's beneficial and finds a way to modify the things that were passed across generations that are not? Because now we have, Gemma and Ruth that are actually sisters, and they're the sisters that are at the family reunion, that always are sitting on different sides of the room. And I go to Ruth and say, hey, what's up with your sister Gemma? Why aren't you guys spending time? Oh, no, I don't know. Gemma and I haven't talked for 15 years. Well, why? I don't remember. All I remember is it was all Gemma's fault. Until she apologizes, we are not going to have any chance to talk about. Strangely enough, I go over to Gemma and I say, what's up with you and Ruth? She's your sister. We haven't talked for 15 years. Well, why? I don't remember. All I remember is that it's all Ruth's fault. Not really good at EI, but how many family reunions, folks, are things like that happening all over the place? Those things are so common. So when we look at that stuff, it goes, this learning skill set or lack thereof passes across generations. And that's something you don't want to inherit, even though you might have to go back and fix it. And this next one, anybody in a relationship that can relate to this? So you have one partner thinking in their mind, oh my God, was it something I did? Was it something I said? Was it something I didn't say? Was it the way I said it? But the other partner is giving them the cold shoulder and won't talk to them. And so how is this going to get resolved? Because you've got the person with all the questions, and then you've got the person with all the answers who's not willing to share. Now, what happens in this situation a lot of times with EI is that you have the first person who wants to know answers to the questions. Then the second person shares them from their perspective, but then the first person disagrees with it, and then it doesn't move it forward at all. It just continues to, kind of offset it. All this stuff is EI, folks, and we see a huge amount of it in our offices all the time. And a big piece that can be very helpful is to change the entire approach and see it through that EI perspective, because then you go right to skill sets, to teaching people new ways of doing things. And with EI, sometimes it's just doing it. Sometimes the clients I, work with, I say, I'm going to give you an assignment now, and I know it's an assignment that you don't agree with whatsoever right now, but I'm just going to ask you to do it because I asked you to do it. Because sometimes people have to learn the skills first to feel the change. They can't, if they wait for the change, they'll never do the skill sets. It's practical application. And so I gave you this, which really lays out EI and differences in individuals and how they present themselves and what their interactional styles are. And these are the places where the research on EI really shows that people with the higher the EI, the more satisfaction people report in their personal as well as professional lives. That has a big impact on their reporting of ancillary, what we would normally consider mental health symptoms like levels and presence of depression, levels and presence of anxiety, those kinds of things. They tend to report a much lower rate of those than people that have lower EI. And also there's this connection, as I said, to job performance. And EI is now part of, in many companies, they give the EI testing, like the IQ testing, but they give EI testing because they found that when they do that, particularly if it's jobs where people have to work together or work in groups, that hiring people with higher EI scores tends to have a better outcome for the company or the group that's hiring, because they're actually hiring people in. They may not have the job skills, but they have the skills they need to work together with their colleagues. So that's becoming very common, particularly in corporate America. And this is why. Look at this. So some of the latest research out shows that 90% of top performers have high EI scores. EI or EQ is responsible for about 58% of your job performance. And people with high EQ or EI on average make almost $30,000 more a year than the folks that have lower scores. So that emotional regulation piece and all those other parts of EI, they make a huge difference in the workforce. That's what the research is showing. And see here, now 20%, 1 in 5 companies in the United States are now measuring EQ in the hiring or promotion process. They're giving the EQ testing and evaluations, 1 in 5, and are using those as part of who's choosing. So now I might have Joseph and Lori, and they're both up for the same job in my company. And they skill set wise, and history wise and experience wise, very similar. But when we give the EI testing, what ends up happening is that we find that Joseph, you have a much higher EI score than she does. And our company is built on people working together in groups. That's the way that our company works. We're more likely to hire Joseph than we are the other candidate. And some of the reasons for that is why employers, once you have a base level of experience and capability that is kind of indicated by IQ, the reason EI is so valued by employers is because the higher the EI, the more the person usually remains calm under pressure, which in high pressure work settings is really important. They tend to resolve conflicts effectively and efficiently. Those two E's are part of EI, effective and efficient. They tend to be very empathetic to their colleagues, and they treat them as such consistently. They tend to lead by example rather than do as I say, not as I do. And they tend to put deeper considerations into business decisions that take into consideration people and feelings and outcome. That's not just bottom line on the paperwork kind of thing. So all of these are reasons why, as I said, folks, 1 in 5 companies choosing to use EI is astronomically high. There's very few other things that 1 in 5 companies do consistently, period, at all. So it's and it's growing more and more. And so L'Oreal was an example of that. So when L'Oreal started hiring salespeople, they looked for high EQ reps over time, and what they found was that the folks that had the high EQ, they outsold other people by over $90,000. Another company that did the same thing with EQ found that their reps the higher the EQ, they outsold their colleagues by more than $54,000 a year. So when you look at that, makes sense for corporate America, good for the person, good for the company. So it's a big piece for that. So, when we get back, as we're moving into the DBT section, what you're going to do right after lunch, so eat some protein, is I pulled, some questions from some of the EI testing. And so what you're going to do is get to experience some of the different questions and kind of experience, pseudo scaling of your answers across those questions. But I'll give you, in terms of boots on ground, practical application of EI and EQ. It'll give you some idea of what all those different ways we look at it. And this is one of the tests that you can go online with. There is a number of tests online. 3 of them are standardized. So 3 of them you have to have been vetted to use them. But there's another couple of them. They're very good that people can go online and take them. I use them with my clients quite a bit, where I have them come into my office and I put them on my computer and I have them do the whole testing piece. And they're great because then when they're done, they not only get a score, but the printout tells them about all the strengths that would be correlated with that EI score and all the things that they could work on across the 4 sections that would improve their skill sets across the EI scores. So folks, talk about being handed an EI or EQ treatment plan. There you have it. I have never found those not to have direct relationship to what brought them into my office. And so that's also helpful when planning treatment plans and things like that. Gives you a lot of grist for the mill to work on. So thoughts are, I'd just like to, before we leave, thoughts or ideas that you have about, how kind of profoundly this is getting integrated into not just the behavioral health world, but in hiring practices, particularly in corporate America. What are people's thoughts about that? What are your reactions to that? Because corporate America didn't routinely give people IQ tests, but they are giving them EI tests, which shows from their perspective how helpful they are. But what are people's thoughts when I said that?
I think that there's a correlation between compassion and like financial savings, whether it comes to healthcare or business or things like that. It tends to be that if we're operating with a sense of empathy, we're more effective as people.
Mm-hmm. Good. Other folks, what are your thoughts? Because remember, this is across corporate America. It's not behavioral health specific. This is Fortune 500 companies that are using the EI screenings to screen people in or out as potential candidates. So,
I think it's they use it for retention purposes, also productivity. I mean, if you're focusing on emotional intelligence, that's going to increase, and people are looking for connection. I mean, where I work, we're a pretty close-knit group of staff, almost like a family. So we kind of value the emotional intelligence piece of things versus the IQ, more, book smart kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's been this divide, like the kind of the part of the country or the world that does jobs that are the more touchy-feely jobs that we would think about this being part of. But the part that's really different is that other part that we would have seen as, and I'm using colloquialisms, obviously, but kind of that more cold, calculating, bottom line, glass windows, office on the corner, crabs in the barrel, knock off your competitors to move up the ladder and stuff like that. That's the part that is really, now being drawn to this and using it quite a bit. To kind of restructure how they think about what gleans success overall and things like that. So Jessica, I don't disagree at all with what you're saying. And probably the works that you're having would embrace that to learn more about how to work better together. Whereas we tend to think of corporate America as where's somebody's knife sheathed because they're going to stab you in the back, as soon as you walk out of the room. And they are really embracing this. And it may still be that they're looking at bottom line and they're seeing this as a way to get there. But my thought about it is, you know what? If every person who works at that corporation or company has a better experience in their work environment because that's the way it is, well, you know what? May not be the final place we want to get to, but it's a step in the right direction. So it's an interesting, it's interesting that the information is so clear about the difference it makes that even, arenas that used to not like even give a second thought to that stuff are really not only thinking about it, but they're embracing it as part of regular practice, which is.
I work in corrections and they're embracing this. So
yeah. And well, in corrections, the interesting thing was that corrections is there's been a huge amount of research that came out of corrections that this went the wrong direction for a long time. So in order, one of the highest correlations between this and corrections around the research that's been done is that the more this is practiced, the safer it is to go to work because people are there for your back. They're not, it doesn't create conflict that then becomes, I worked in the Department of Corrections when I first got out of my first master's degree program, and they were having problems at that point in time. It was a huge shakeup in the Connecticut prison system because problems amongst correctional officers were creating situations where correctional officers would call for backup and other officers would purposely wait a period of time before they backed them up because they wanted them to get beaten up as a payback for something they did. These are not the inmates. These are supposed to be the people that are in charge of the inmates, and their behavior was paralleling that of the inmates almost identically. And so the power of this kind of stuff is so important to keep people safe in the workplace. So that doesn't surprise me that is happening, and I'm very glad it's happening. Good for, that's terrific. So
I kind of look at it as, whether it's behavioral health or corporate, if you can play nice in the sandbox with other people, then everybody gets better results and everybody feels better about it.
Yes.
Just sort of basic.
Yes. And there are some sandboxes, Marcy, where I would even back that up that you just don't throw sand at each other in the sandbox, and then we'll work you to the next level next. But the problem is that without kind of this general idea of this, people don't even recognize like that's something that's possible in the sandbox, just the basic stuff. And so agencies and companies and people and families and couples, they just go on doing more of the same for generation. That's the scary part, is for generations. And even do it in even babyer steps, which is get in the sandbox, sit there and don't cause problems for anybody else and don't throw any sand. That's like a monumental move for this generation. We'll do the next thing in the next group. Absolutely. So we hope for the best, and then we take small steps that way. Stephanie, you go ahead and you'll be the last one, and then we'll go to lunch.
All right. I was just going to share. So my brother works in finance, and so they have a series of interviews with people. And for the final interview, which is the point they kind of think that they got the job because they're taking them out to dinner to celebrate. That's really the last interview that they're doing, is like how they're treating the staff that's serving them and how they are behaving toward other people in this environment. So I thought that really incorporated EI. Yeah,
it does, because it looks at, are you just being good, or is this actually a philosophy you live by? And those are two very different things, because most of us can hold it together to be good if we know what the rules are and we want something badly enough. But whether or not it truly is an internal evolution process for us is often very, very different from that. And the interesting thing about that, and it goes back to what everybody has said, it's kind of a closure for this piece, is one of the areas where they first started using this, which I was profoundly surprised by, is the think tanks in California. I come from California. That's where I was raised. And so people in California and other people as well, will know Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, one of the things that Silicon Valley is famous for is the think tanks. And basically the think tanks in Silicon Valley, quite frankly, is they just bring people together that are brilliant, the people with the IQs of 180, and they just bring them together and they just say, pretty much think. And from that comes massive amounts of changes. I mean, that's how the concept of a black hole was developed, folks, is through a Silicon Valley think tank. But everything from products to scientific thinking processes, everything. But at some point in time, even if I'm the person who comes up with this new concept, so I'm not a black hole person, but you know, the one that always got me is I can't believe I didn't think of the Swifter. Somewhere out there, there's somebody who's making billions of dollars on the Swifter, and I was sweeping for years and didn't think of it. I'm very upset with that. But you think about, I mean, these things that, you know, if you're in the product section, the Swifter was as big a deal as the black hole was in the scientific section. But at some point, folks, no matter how brilliant you were to think of the concept, in order for it to play itself out, more people are going to have to be involved. And what they were finding in Silicon Valley was that it wasn't working out. So I developed this, I had the concept of the Swifter, but then you put me in a room with people that had to operationalize it and it fell apart. And so even in Silicon Valley now, they take the most brilliant of the brilliant that come through with these astronomically high IQs, but then in the way that everybody's in once you have an IQ of 184. But when you're down to picking, well, we have 3 positions and we have 7 applicants. Even in Silicon Valley, they're using EQ to narrow that field down so that you get the best of the best in balance, because once the thinking is done, you need to have that person available to do the operationalization. And that makes a lot of sense, folks, when you think about it, doesn't it? That you have to have people who have that higher capacity in both sides, because otherwise you end up with this brilliant concept or idea and it just sits and languishes. You have to have somebody who eventually can be able to interact with others to put it into some form of effect. So this is not just us in behavioral health, folks. It's slowly but surely, you know, kind of getting out there to lots of different arenas, which is a good thing. And it's particularly good when our clients learn it, because it means quality of life for them is likely to improve. And that's, I think, why we all go to work, is to help people with that. So great. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts. I really appreciate that. So we're right at the time we're supposed to be. So it's at 12:30. So I will see you back at 1:30. Have a great lunch. And I'll see you later. Let me look at page 1 too and see if I can see if anybody's looking. I have like 1, 2, 3. I have like 8, 9 people on page 2 without cameras on. So I don't know if you're back, you lost power, whatever happened. So if you're on, if you don't have cameras on, if you could please put them on. That's the only way I can tell if you're kind of here. So, all right. So you ready to take the EI, the little EI survey to see how you're doing? Melissa's all biting at, I can see she's chomping at the bit there. She's like, yes, indeed. I want to find out. I have a perfect EI score. I can see it in the face. And we'll see if Marcy throws sand on people in the sandbox. We will also find that out from it as well. So what you're going to need to do this, and let me just double check to see how many there are. There are a grand total of 18. So you're going to need a piece of paper that you can number from 1 to 18 and a writing implement. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And you're going to want a number from 1 to 18. And okay, so what's going to happen is I'm going to progress, and these slides are also in your handout, so you can use them with clients later if you want to. So I'm going to go through the 18 slides. What it will have is a statement at the top, and then you're going to pick your correct response or your personal response from that. You don't want to put the the number or letter of the letter of the response, you want to put the number that's in the little parentheses, because at the end you're going to add up all those numbers. All right. So you're focusing on the number at the end of your answer. All right. Everybody good? And if I go too quickly, just unmute and ask me to stop. And I will hold on so you can read it if you need to think about it a little bit more. Everybody ready? Good. All right. Here we go. One second, I have a whole plethora of people that are trying to enter it. It is blocking it. I'll be right with you. Okay, got admit all. And that should, yep, there we go. All right. All righty. Starting with number 1. There you go. And you'll see in the parentheses next to each one, that's the number you're writing down. That's what you'll be adding up.
You gotta be more.
All right, here's number 2. Whoop, I lied to you. Here's number 2. Sorry about that. There we go.
No, Jojo.
Are people set with this one? That was a little longer than the previous ones have been.
Could you please go back to number 5? I missed part of it. I'm sorry.
That will be a 50% backup charge, so that will be added to your fee for the training. But yes, I'm more than happy to.
No problem.
All set?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so let me go back to 6, folks, in case I cut somebody off before they were done with number 6.
I'm sorry, I missed 7.
doing questions for an emotional intelligence quiz, essentially. I can say, just from looking at these questions, how I'm answering them now is a lot different than I would have answered them 5 years ago.
I go to answer and it tells me I'm emotionally retarded. I'm very sensitive.
Well, see, the thing is with me, some of these questions, it depends on the person to me, because it says one of your best friends has suffered a miscarriage. How do you respond? Allow your friend to express her feelings and offer your support. Spend time with her, but avoid talking about her loss. Convince her to go out with some friends to get her mind off it, or give her some time to herself. Well, if she wants time to herself, then I think that's the right answer. Anyway, one of your coworkers has a habit that annoys you. The problem seems to be getting worse each day. How do you respond? Tell your coworker what's bothering you. Make a complaint about their behavior to your supervisor. Talk about your coworker behind his back or suffer in silence. Yeah.
Those stupid questions to me, or but it's telling you what the right answer is and what the wrong answers are.
Well, they tell you that by the scoring anyway, because if you go with the right answer is the one that says 4. And you get 4 points for it.
It's like, it's the stupid.
Yeah. See, my problem is I overthink everything. So to me, it's what is specifically the habit that is annoying me? Is it something that's unethical? Because if it's something that's unethical, yes, I would probably go to them and be like, this isn't right. But I might talk to my supervisor too, depending on the level. Anyway. But that's how I've always been with overthinking the questions anyway. But it just, to me, like, yes, how I answer which ones I chose now is much different to where I got a final score of 56. But I'd say 5 years ago, I would have answered much differently, and I would have allowed the overthinking to give me the wrong answer. Well, even this one, it says, you've been stressed out at work and haven't finished projects as quickly as you should. Oh, they changed it on me. Okay. When your boss suddenly assigns you another large project, how do you feel? Your options are anxious about getting the work done, overwhelmed by the task before you, angry at your boss, or depressed.
Are there any that anyone missed that you need me to go back to?
Also, these...
I missed the first 3 because of power outage.
Power outage is not our friend today, is it?
It is not.
But the images they have shows you that what
There's
their beliefs are.
Blips of it here. We're making it skip.
It's like
here
it has
too,
nothing
so.
to do with
Here's one.
intelligence.
Just let me know when you're set, and I'll go to the next one.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
All right. Did anybody else miss any? Because I know some people were, I admitted some people, so you may have missed some along the way. So just let me know. I'm glad to go back to them.
Can I get number 4 and number 9?
Number 4?
Good.
And number Number 9.
All good.
Good. Anyone else missing anything? Anybody else missing anything and you don't want to admit it? No? Okay. So let me go to the stop share first, and then I'll show you the scoring piece. So ultimately what you're going to do is add those all up and get your total score. But so the two things I would share with you is that, and we'll go back to them for a second in a moment. So the first thing is, did anybody notice anything about the graphics on every single one of them? What was the consistency about the graphics on every single one?
They were all dogs.
Yeah.
Yes, they were. And what's the reason for that?
I would assume you're a large dog rescue. But
well, yes, I do have a dog rescue.
Yeah.
Dog sanctuary, so that's true. But there is actually a clinical reason too. So what do you think the clinical reason?
You can't read emotion on the dogs.
Say that one more time?
Because it's not as easy to read the emotion. It's just support.
Well, yes. So Rory is correct. So folks, and this is something people have to think about, because anybody who hasn't connected these dots, I'm going to have to send you back to Psychotherapy 101. People are not capable of unconditional positive regard. As a species, we are not capable of it. It's a nice thought, but it's not possible. Carl Rogers' idea was kind of like, if people actually understand Rogerian psychology, it's the same as Maslow's idea about self-actualization, which is unconditional positive regard is something that human beings want to work towards, but we don't have the capacity of ever reaching it. Similar to full self-actualization. We want to work towards it, but we don't have the capacity to do that. There is not a human being on this planet, including the Dalai Lama, who is not biased. We are all biased, which means we're not capable of unconditional positive regard. Animals, interestingly enough, particularly those that are companion animals, are the only creatures on the planet that are capable of that. They are the only creatures that are capable of having no preconceived notions whatsoever. And so when you work with things, remember, because when we're looking at EI, it's predominantly right-brained. Right-brained is emotional and visual. So when you are doing anything around EI, folks, you have to make sure you don't undermine the content of the EI by using anything that's visual that will create an impression that has any kind of impact on the process. All right. So if I had put pictures of people or even places, you have no idea in those situations where even on an unconscious level that, well, Melissa, I'm not even realizing it, but Melissa reminds me of my ex-sister-in-law and I hated her. Well, there you go. And I'm not even aware that connection happened. Consciously, it's all unconscious. Or, Gemma puts a picture of a beautiful, area of Scotland on something. But the reality is the rolling field reminds me of where I got married and I, actually technically murdered my husband and buried him somewhere and I'm fleeing from the law. That you never know what kinds of things are going to get stirred up in the unconscious. So we need to make sure that we don't do anything visually that fights what we're trying to get the brain to do in the right brain piece when we're talking about EI. Does that make sense to folks? So you definitely, with things like the handout and like when you do psychoeducational groups and things like that, you want a lot of visuals because we want to really stimulate the right brain, but you don't want to stimulate it in any way that counteracts what you're trying to make as a point or get to in terms of processing for the client. Do those two things connect for people? Thank you, Monica. Every once in a while, I have a brilliant moment. Kind of swing around again. The next one's scheduled for 23 years from now. So yes, but those are the things. Because if you think about things, and I mean, my specialty is differential diagnosis, but my other specialty in my doctoral program is neuropsychopharmacology. So for me, it's all about the brain and what reinforces itself in the brain chemistry, including emotions. And when we're looking at, the more we know about the left and right brain, the more we know about how much unconscious experiences reinforce things that are affective in the right brain. And EI is almost all right brain. So we want to be careful about that. The other thing, and this is a suggestion, I do it and it's worked very well for me, is if you look at the slides, I picked the ones I specifically did for you from this larger assessment for a reason, because just look at the concepts of these slides, folks. So I know you were reading them to answer, but now stop and read them as the counseling, clinical, peer support, case management, social work, psychologists, individuals that you are. Think about how big and important each individual concept of each slide is in terms of a skill set for individuals. So look at this. Question 1. In my group of friends, I'm generally aware of how each person feels about the other person in our social circle. In EI, folks, that's the whole skill of the empathy piece. Are you able to step outside of yourself and understand how other people are connecting? That's a whole EI skill. Look at the second one. When I'm upset, I can usually pinpoint exactly why I'm distressed. That's that whole EI piece I told you about, the difference between I'm always pissed off versus no. I'm able to ratchet it down to I'm frustrated, I'm anxious, I'm feeling vulnerable, those kinds of things. These are huge. Every one of these questions is an enormous concept. It's an enormous concept that when mastered over a long period of time can make the difference between whether someone has a very healthy context for their interpersonal lives or whether or not they continue to struggle. And folks, think about how many things come secondary to that. If our interpersonal life, assuming we don't have a couple of the personality styles or traits or psychiatric diagnoses that don't lend to that. But if you're a part of the larger, kind of the bigger bell curve, normative 68% of the population, relationships with other people in lots of contexts are a very important grounding agent and a fundamental kind of baseline for people, a foundation. And all of these, each one of these questions represents a very large skill set that people have to, you can't master them, but continue to improve it if they're going to really change probably the majority of what's, underlining and feeding why they're in your office in the first place. How many people use substances, folks, because they're lonely or they don't have close ties with people or they feel self-conscious. I mean, one of the most common ways that adolescents start their relationship with alcohol, we know from the research, is they're too self-conscious to interact with peers, so they drink before they do it. When you want to check out how many high school kids, ask this if you work with high school kids, how many of them have a drink before they go to a party? How many of them had a drink before they went to the prom? That's the reason why in the limousine on the way to the prom, folks, somebody snuck a bottle in. So all of these things connect with them. What I do with them, which is I find very helpful, is literally I use each one of these as the theme of a session or as the theme of a group. One slide only. So I give them all of these and I tell them, okay, so next time we meet, we're going to sit down and really talk about what slide 1 is about and how that fits into your life and what your answer is and why your answer is the way it is and why you think your answer is the way it is and what you'd like the answer actually to be. I can do a whole hour therapy session on just one of these slides, folks. Just one. And if you were to able to teach your folks the coping skills of just these 18
Think.
And then I'll give you
There we go.
the scoring slide. Let me give people 1 minute that haven't done. All right, the scoring slide, here it comes. No, it didn't. I lied. Keeps jumping around over here. All right, here's your scoring slide.
I got just about average, apparently. Because average apparently is a score of 49 to 56, and I got 56 exactly.
So, give you some idea of where you're at. And now this is a segment, folks, of an EI test that is actually the entire, like the IQ test, the EQ test. This one actually has 150 questions on it. All of them very similar to the ones you answered. So you got a little bit more than 10% of the test. And I wanted to give you that to give you an example of, or experience across all the kinds of questions that are asked and the skill sets. But if you took the full one, it would have been 150 questions. And the scaling would be the same, but obviously there'd be a lot more points for each one. So before we go forward, so tell me a little bit about your thoughts or ideas or responses to what was in the questions or the answers. Or you can yell and scream about your score if you don't like it, whatever you'd like to do. But what were your thoughts about, kind of the content of the questions and the content of the answers?
I think for me, it depended, a couple of the questions depended on the wording of the answer, where I would grade myself. So like in number 15, it was about schoolwork. And one was, do I just, suck it up and do the best I can going forward? Or do I confront the professor? I would never confront the professor, but I would have a discussion with them other than what they might have written on my paper. So, my answer to that was, based on what I thought the best response would be. And that would be moving forward and just accepting the answer and doing the best I can on the next one, because I would not confront a professor.
See, and that, Gemma, though, so that's fine. But that's a great example of what in EI you would process with someone, because one person's definition of confront might sound aggressive, whereas another person might say, I'm a very gregarious, outgoing person, and I have a strong personality. So I would say, yeah, go confront the professor and say, why do you think this is a B plus? I think it's an A minus. So let's talk about it. And I would say, I would confront their perspective. But other people might, in their own lens, see the word confront whenever used. I'm not saying this is you, Gemma. I'm saying in general that they see confront as having either an aggressive or a hostile undertone. So they would shy away from that answer. And that's exactly, that's a perfect way to kind of bring up what I was just saying. That's exactly when I do one of these with each person. That's what the kind of stuff we process. That's the kind of, and like in that situation, I might say to that person, so have there been times when you thought the only two options were confront, which means aggression, or let it go? Is there nothing in between for you? Not you, meaning them. And so the questions are written that way. So because they're meant to be processed, they're meant to be discussed. They're not meant like the traditional IQ test. The answer is right or wrong. There's really not much. We're not, 2 and 2 is always 4. We really don't have anything to discuss. But with EQ and EI, part of it is the processing. And that's why I said when you do it the electronic format, you get like a multiple page assessment of what you chose, for that, and where there are consistencies across your answers and where there are inconsistencies and what the inconsistency might mean. Like in this case, it might say, it may be you perceived some language as stronger than others might. And it gives you all those write-ups like that, which is really cool. It's, cause so much of EI language has some level of personal part to it or subjectivity to it. Whereas IQ, it's very objective. So that's exactly, you honed in exactly the way they're written that way. Which might feel like, damn, where's my answer? But it's meant to stir up that really looking at it, trying to be insightful, trying to have aha moments about it. So good job. You picked that up very well. Other folks, thoughts that you had?
Well, I thought it was quite clear where I could improve. There were a few things that, I just noticed the score was lower. I went, I think I need to work on that one.
So some consistency of theme across more than one? Yeah, absolutely. That's another insightful thing to have, is that, oh, wait a minute. Maybe this is a good target area for me. Great. That's terrific. Right. Other folks.
As I was reading through the questions, I noticed that I'm like, oh, wait, so I answered this now, but I would have answered this differently a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm like, oh, I've changed this, I've changed that because I'm older, or I have more knowledge, or I'm working more with people. So things are different, but I'm like, I noticed that, oh, I would have answered this question this way instead of this way.
Yep. And Lynn, some of that can be for some people at because at different times of our lives, we're doing different things, but some of that can be, hey, this is about maturation. I've become more skillful and those kind of things. Sometimes though, people notice it. And I've worked with people that have said what you've said, but in the opposite, which is I would have answered myself in a more self-assured way a couple of years ago, but now I don't. And that means that often something's gone on in their life that has impacted their self-worth, their self-esteem, those kinds of things. Like I see that all the time in both women and men that I work with that have been in domestically violent or IPV relationships. And they'll say, you know what, when I was a teenager, I would have said, screw that. And I would have gone my own way. But I answered it this way today because I'm just coming out of this relationship for 10 years where I was kind of beaten down, those kinds of things. So, but that's that insight that's so important for people to understand, So excellent. Another excellent point. Other folks? Other thoughts? When I went back and I just went through the first couple, but when I pointed out the questions, could you see how any and each one of those could be a full therapy or counseling session? Yeah. For some of my folks, one of them could be multiple counseling sessions if they don't have the skill, if we come to the point that they don't have the skill for it. So, I mean, I could, without at all exaggerating, take those 18 questions, and that could be a year worth of weekly therapy for me and a client to help them build those skills. Because when you've got a year's worth, I mean, you're talking about 3 sessions per concept. And my clients, the people I serve, in general, it's not 3 sessions. It's years before they make some of the changes because they're counteracting years that got them where they're at. And we're dealing with substance abuse in between and psychiatric symptoms. But I find these incredibly beneficial and helpful. And where they do a great partnering, and those of you that are familiar with this it probably will make sense, is where I find an amazing partnering is between these and MET and MI. Because almost always, without fail, when I go back and look at people who are stuck in pre-contemplation and contemplation and even in preparation, it's usually because some of these skill sets in the EI arena they don't have them, or they're not developed enough. And so that oomph they need to move to move to the next thing, to put something in action, to stand on your own 2 feet, they don't have that. And I almost always, when I'm seeing people struggle in MI and MET to move through the stages of change, I immediately go back to EI and say, where are those missing skill sets? What's happening that this person is not able to move forward? And there's virtually never a time. I can't even think of the last time where I went back to EI and it wasn't like ding, 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 ding. Here's the answer.
Can I ask a question? I was curious about people's receptiveness to the EI and, just generally speaking, I mean, do you use that language specifically, or are you just being more generic in presentation?
A lot of times, for some people, that's a really good question, Rory, because I have people who come into my office in my private practice. So there's a whole different group than what I do.
Yeah.
The rest of the week, who will come in and they want the intellectual terminology because it feels like it almost plays to that narcissistic superiority that they may be walking in the office needing to work on. That's why they're having the problems they are in their life. So for that group, I will say, well, like the way there's an IQ, there's also emotional intelligence. And it sounds like, there might be some areas we could work on with that so that your EQ score would increase. And there are clients that I have that's exactly the way I have to put it, because that's what is the hook. When I'm working with the clients I work with, in the state system, I really talk with it more about, I'll say things like, in what you've shared with me, a lot of the pain and trauma in your life is that you've tried to make emotional connections with people who weren't available, or you tried to make emotional connections with people that were not safe. Mm-hmm. What I'd like to do is spend a lot of time working with you on developing skills so that you're less likely to make those mistakes again in the future, that you'll find the right people moving forward in your life. So I do a lot of reworking. It's the same theme, but the verbiage is different.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, because I guess I was thinking along both lines, and then I'm curious for the folks who are seeking the more intellectual, stimulating language. I don't know if maybe this is my own perception, so I'll just check it out a little bit. I can see them being somewhat, I'm emotionally intelligent, defensive about it. And so I was trying to play this out a little bit in my head, how this might go. And I'm not sure how it would go, not meaning that I'm not going to use it, not meaning any of that, but I was just kind of curious about that.
Well, the thing is, in that situation, folks, this is going to, I'm saying this way I would say it to you and Rory. It would be different to clients, but the theme is what I'm trying to focus on. So basically, if you're emotionally intelligent, why are you in my office? See, that's the question. Is that if I think Rory froze? And do people understand my question about that? I mean, if you think you're emotionally intelligent, then why are you in my office as a therapist? Because virtually everything that's going to bring you in my office means that something interactive is not working. Do people understand what I'm saying? Think about the people in your office, folks. How many of them come to you because everything in their interpersonal lives is wonderful, but then there's something else wrong? It doesn't work that way. Literally the interpersonal part is part and parcel of almost everything. It's either causative or resulting or, parallel, but that interpersonal piece is virtually always there. So in answer to, unfortunately, Rory asked a great question, then she froze. So in answer to that, you would find the way, of course, to say that in a appropriate way. I said it very directly because I was making a point with you all. But the answer to that is that in whatever way felt appropriate at the time with the individual person I'm working with, I would say, if you are so certain and feel so secure in your interpersonal skills and in your, and you're in your emotional intelligence, then why are you seeking a third person, which is me, to help you with something? Because pretty much anything you're going to bring into my office, I can tie back to something that has other people involved. And if you can work all that out on your own, why are you sitting in my office? Because nobody comes to see me because, nobody says, hey, beautiful day outside, nothing to do, let me go see a psychologist. It doesn't work that way. There's some form of discord or discomfort there that brings them into my office. And so in a supportive way, but in a kind of just pragmatic way, that would be my question to them, is then if you're really feeling that strongly and secure about it, because I can't change anybody else. So that's not going to work. The only thing you can do by coming into my office is change yourself. And if you think you are proficient at this and have all the skills, and you don't have any interpersonal issues that have anything to do with you, then you have to explain to me what I can do to help you, because I'm not exactly sure what you're asking me for. And that's when, and then I hear I seem to be having some problems with some people at work, because they think that I'm too blah. Well, that would be interpersonal effectiveness. And then you just keep bringing it back to that, so that they really understand what that means, which is what's the really important part overall. It also gets very powerful in groups. And some of you might be aware of TREM and MTREM as trauma treatment methodologies. I love MTREM, quite frankly. I think it's fabulous. I also like TREM, but I take some of the individual sessions for TREM and MTREM, and I put some of this information into it. So it's kind of like, the combining of the two. And I find that it actually, people tend to understand the MTREM concepts and the TREM concepts around how does trauma relate to these kinds of things as well. Because if you think about it, folks, if the client you're working with is coming from a traumatic environment, the number one thing that's going to be affected for them is how they interact with other people. And that's all EI. So it ultimately kind of comes down to it in all different arenas. So good question if you're back, Rory, good question. All right. So as we're continuing on with our day today, so just to lead us in to the DBT piece of this, which is the practice piece, just, reminding people, as I said, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And remember, the self-actualization, from Maslow is what humans are thought to have a drive to try to attain. The bottom two, folks, the physiological and safety, those are the survival skills. Our clients in general, folks, have a PhD in those. They are much better at those two skill sets than we ever will be. If we had to live some of the lives our clients do, we would fall apart like instantaneously. And we want to give full credit to our clients for the survival skills, because that's what allowed them to come into our office. But in most cases, by the time they're coming into our office, what's missing is those upper three. And look at the upper three, folks: love and belonging, esteem, and ultimately self-actualization, which is, all about kind of higher abstract thinking. But when you start on tier 3 with love and belonging, folks, that's EI. That is all about connection to others. And so you can't get to that stage and move through it unless you have the skills to do it. Or you will constantly continue to connect with the people you've been connecting with prior. And that is not giving you the life you want, or you wouldn't be in my office. So EI starts right at that third level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And interestingly enough, that third level, third, fourth, and fifth, is the thriving skills. All right. First two layers, surviving skills. Top 3 levels, thriving skills. And to even access the third level, your success and the richness of how you will access that is really, the foundation of that is in the EI skills, and in that whole arena. So as I said, direct correlation across many, many things overall. And so these are just some ways for you to think about it. So, if you look at, so this is a terminology that I use all the time. Remember, words matter, folks. So I talk to people all the time about not using functional and dysfunctional in any way, shape, or form when you're with clients, not using healthy or unhealthy when you're with clients, not using codependent. God, don't ever use that word. Try to eradicate it from your brain. And the reason for that, folks, and it doesn't really matter what we think, because we don't get a vote. What matters is what the clients feel in response. And what the data clearly shows is that functional, dysfunctional, healthy, not healthy, and codependent clients all believe those are terms of judgment. So you can say whatever you want to flower them up. They hear them as judgment. All right. Because they label them as people. This is the terminology that is recommended. I use it all the time because I find it is much more helpful. And that is labeling behavior as productive or unproductive, depending on, and here's the definition, folks, that pulls it out of the judgment zone, is first of all, it's always asked to the client. So the client says, I did A, B, and C. And so the therapist or the counselor or case manager will say, well, was that productive or unproductive for you? And that question is asking very simply, is it moving you closer to what you desire when you come into therapy, or is it moving you farther away? So the client self-defines and the client determines and shares whether or not they're feeling closer or further away from their treatment goals. None of that has any connotation of judgment from us. And remember, folks, this is one of the toughest things. It doesn't matter what you intended. Intent is very different than reaction. And it doesn't, we hear people all the time say, oh, well, that wasn't intended. Well, it doesn't matter. I already did the harm. So it doesn't really matter what you intended. The harm's done. So we want to ratchet that back and look at language, because language is also very EI. And so, as I said, this idea of saying to a client, so, you went and you saw your old girlfriend again, even though she's dating somebody else, and it's been very hard for you to get over her. So was that productive or not productive, do you think, in terms of behavior, in terms of where you want to go and what you want to accomplish? And the client gets to answer. So this gives you some ideas of those as it relates to emotional intelligence. So in the middle, you'll see the emotional intelligence skills, and you'll see the productive states on one side, and you'll see the unproductive states on the other. And we want to, language matters, visuals matters, all those things. The unconscious matters. They all have an impact on what the person takes away with them. So if you take a moment, look at some statements from people with lower EI scores. So if I only had a different job, if I only had finished graduation, if I had only been more beautiful or handsome, if only my spouse had stopped drinking, if only I had been born rich and famous, if only I had good contacts, if only I had better friends, if only I'd married someone else. What do these all have in common? Every statement here has one thing in common. What is it?
If.
What? Said that. You're out of this training. Whoever said that, go. This is not a grammar training. But the if onlys, you're right. That part is true. But there's another even much more problematic one for this person to ever change.
Looks like they're blaming other people.
Well, not only other people, you're absolutely right on the right track. Everything's external to them.
Yeah, external.
They are relinquishing all impact or control. It's everybody else. It's everything else. That's where the if comes in as well. And the reality of the fact is that people who have high EI really take a lot of ownership of their personal choices, their personal control, their personal power, and good or bad. I can't tell you the number of times in an average week I say, oh, I screwed that up. That was my fault. But that is a form of personal power, is to own that, because the personal power of that is to be able to accept it and not take it as a personal failing that harms self-esteem, to see it as an action and then go, well, how do I need to do it differently next time? Those kinds of things. And so the higher the EI, the more the person doesn't take responsibility for things that aren't theirs, but takes responsibility for everything that is or could be theirs to impact. And all this is about it's separate from me. And so this takes those four things for you when you're actually applying it and tells you what's in each of the columns. And this I've juxtaposed it as we're moving into DBT. So when you look at the EI, self-awareness. This is a big part of it. So when you're working with someone on EI, it's about, knowing their own story and how it affects you. Most of my clients don't know their own story. They know little pieces of it. They have forgotten most of their childhood because it was, in most cases, very traumatic to them. They don't know many people in their lives. They're not connected across generations. Even, some of the people, particularly young men, I run into this all the time. Even when I ask them about one generation back, their parents, they know nothing. They know very little. They live with them, but they don't know what their parents do. They don't know, how they met. They don't know where they were born. Nothing. They don't know it. History. And what I say to folks that I work with all the time, which I absolutely believe in after all the years of clinical practice I've gone through, is people who don't know where they come from have a very difficult time trying to plan where they want to go. And
I'm so sorry to interject, but my hand has been up for a while and I don't want to go on too long without
geez, you're not on my screen. Jump in.
Oh, I'm so sorry, but this is a part of our own story, right? Like, so as clinicians, part of our story is where does the hierarchy come from? That we were looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And by not understanding the whole story about how he got that knowledge, we miss the context of community and cultural perpetuity that the Blackfoot tribe where Maslow got those ideas. Like, because we don't know that part of it, it sort of prevents us from understanding that some of these, a person can't, they need community. They need other people like us, but not just us, to help with that. And so it's just something that I wanted to make sure before we moved on too far. And this felt like a good moment to bring that up. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no. That's excellent. You're absolutely right. And the bottom two, I mean, it's even more reinforcing. So I appreciate what you interjected and said, because the bottom two you can potentially do on your own, but it leaves you with a sense of emptiness and lack of spirituality that is very heavily intertwined in a lot of Maslow's work. The upper three requires almost that it is the interconnection across people, across generations, that reinforces the capacity to keep moving forward in the upper three. You can survive on your own. Thriving on your own is hard. It's very hard. It's interconnection that usually is a big part of that. So thank you for sharing that. That was a very important point. So these four in the self-awareness, are actually things that you would focus with people on when you're working on helping them, identify places in their emotional intelligence where they need or want to become more masterful of skills. But a lot of that means going back and really finding out the journey that led to you in my office on this particular day. And that journey doesn't just include you. It includes the other people that were part of that journey. Then the self-management is a lot of technique-based things, and learning the technique part of the skill set, so that you can, that's emotion regulation pieces. And then the social awareness is all about that part about understanding self, understanding others and the emotions that they are conveying accurately, and then understanding how to bridge between the two. And then the third one, relationship management. That's the interpersonal effectiveness piece. And really looking at, how do you develop empathy? How do you develop the ability to interact with people in a way that is both and? So that is both very empathetic and has good boundaries. That's, a big part of DBT. So this is where EI crosses over to DBT and why they're such excellent partners. Because if you look, and those of you that are aware of DBT, when you look on the right here, these are the four major principles of DBT. And they are in some way not exact mirror images, but very, very complete mirror images of what's in the EI piece. And so the four pieces, the mindfulness, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness mirror the four from EI. So my question to you, particularly those of you that have had DBT before, so can somebody explain, so DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. So what's a dialectic? Why is this whole model of therapy based on the word dialectic? What is one? Because I'm sure many of you have used the term DBT before and, have taken the training in it before. So all of DBT is based on one word, dialectic. What is a dialectic?
It's when two things are true at the same time that don't match each other. Like I have a need for alone time, and I have a need for time with other people.
Correct. Yes. So dialectics are, and there's thousands of them that we deal with every day. And the more proficiently we deal with them, the better we tend to do in day-to-day life. So you're absolutely right. So dialectics are when two things are present that appear to be in conflict or opposite, but are both true at the same time. All right. And people that struggle, and this is why it started out. So, DBT was originally developed by Marsha Linehan. Marsha Linehan is someone who has borderline personality disorder. She went through many years of treatment. And after that, she went on and she got her PhD, and continued to move forward. And what she did was actually go through and look at all the things that she had encountered throughout her years of treatment and picked the ones that were effective for her towards getting, better and stabilized. And then she formatted them in a way that had an order and a timing and activities and things like that. And then out of that was born DBT. So when we look at that piece and we look at the DBT piece, the people that know how to navigate what's called the middle ground, which is an undulation between the two discrete ends, tend to do well in day-to-day life. It's not that people don't have problems, but when they do have problems, they have skill sets that start to resolve them in the least destructive manner. And an enormous part of those skill sets, of those 4 skill sets, are based on the better, I hate that as a judgment word, but the stronger your skills are on EI, the more capacity you're going to have to learn and master the DBT skills. There's a direct correlation between the two. All right. And so when we look at this piece, and we'll look at it for a minute or two and then we'll stretch. So when you look at DBT here, and you look at what is DBT. So DBT as an intervention strategy, it's an approach to help people modulate, regulate, and control their emotions and their behaviors. And so not the feelings, though, and there's a difference there. So DBT is not about in any way, shape, or form trying to control feelings. It's about when you have a feeling, how do you control the emotional reaction to that and then the behavior that comes after that? It's also a way to increase skillful behaviors, and in increasing the skill, reducing the problematic behaviors. There's a direct relationship between the two, and as one increases, the other inherently decreases. To help us better understand ourselves and others. And there's the EI, folks. As soon as you've got others in the mix, there's your EI. And then the big piece with DBT, and this was born out of a lot of the pain that comes from borderline personality disorder, is it's about creating a life worth living. It's about creating a life that people wake up and want to be present for, rather than wake up and in many cases want to escape from it. And often in borderline personality disorder, that's where we see some of the self-harmful behavior, all the way up to active suicidality. DBT is an interesting modality, though, because DBT is what the practice of DBT says is, if you truly want to be a good DBT therapist, you have to live DBT 24 hours a day. It is not something you do to other people. It is something you practice as a lifestyle. So all the skills within DBT are supposed to be practiced by the therapist and role modeled by the therapist in everything they do with the client. It's not something, so I'm not going to sit down with Muriel and teach her DBT. I am a DBT therapist. I consider myself one. I've been practicing it for over a decade. It is one of my primary foundations of my therapeutic model. So when I sit down with Muriel, every aspect of the interaction between the two of us is going to be DBT related, including the language. And DBT has its own language. The first part of the language is those four sets of, the 4 different skill sets. But the language of navigating the middle ground, dialectic, wise mind, rational mind, emotional mind, all of those are part of the DBT language. And so if Muriel comes in and she's coming in for therapy, and I explained to her that, I practice DBT, and I explained some of it to her, it means that part of her therapeutic process is Muriel's going to learn the language, because the language becomes the trigger for behavior change. It's one of the most powerful parts of DBT. So once Muriel learns that and learns the language, then when she calls me up and she's, dysregulated, and, so she's, very emotional, being very emotive. She just had a problem with a friend of hers, she's, said something mean, and she's afraid she's lost a friendship. And so she's very emotionally dysregulated. What I'm going to say to her, first of all, is I'm going to say, okay, Muriel, what would your wise mind say in this situation? And if Muriel's been working with me on DBT, that's the same as a Pavlovian dog's bell ringing. Because the moment I use the term wise mind, she's been acclimated that means something very specific. And what that will do is immediately ratchet down the emotionality and get her to a place where she's in the thinking state. Not overly emotional, not overly intellectual, but wise mind, which is the middle ground. And that's where problem solving happens. And that's the core of DBT, is getting people away from the discrete ends of the dialectics to the middle ground, so that they can think clearly, they can modulate their emotions, and they can practice the DBT skills, which actually are all born out of emotional intelligence. And that's why DBT is so effective. It now is used unilaterally with, across the board in therapy arenas, but particularly more and more research is being done in some of the places where we've had no therapeutic interventions that have worked. Borderline personality disorder being one, narcissistic personality disorder, it's being used with very commonly now, and it just started to be used with antisocial personality disorder as well. And the research is showing it has more effect than any other approach that has ever been used for those. And as we know, the personality disorders provide some of the greatest challenges because the dysregulation is so large. So let me do this one last piece for this, and then we'll go stretch. Whoops, sorry, I left you guys behind. Let me try that again. There's what we're looking for. So when we look at this piece, with the DBT, so this looks at what we were talking about was, what does dialectical mean? It means two ideas that seem opposite can both be true and present at the same time. So example, I want to be clean and sober. I also want to keep using drugs. Talk to anybody early in recovery. They desperately want to stop using drugs and alcohol because they don't want to pay the consequences anymore. But if I said, hey, I have a way that you can avoid the consequences and still get high, they'd be like, oh, hey, perfect situation. That's what I'm here for, actually. And that's perfect sense. That's being human. I'm not saying that in any derogatory way. That's being human. If everybody on here could eat your favorite food 7 days of the week, and you didn't have to worry about cholesterol or weight gain, most people would be eating their favorite food 7 days of the week, or eating it more than they do now at their roots. For those of you that are parents, if you tell me that this dialectic does not live within you, I'm calling DCF. Because the reality of the fact is this is parenting 101. I want my children to come to me for help. And I also want them to become dependent. And we wonder how parents drive their children crazy. That's in the old days, we used to call that a schizophrenic message. Now we call it a dialectic. But it's true. Both of those things can be true, particularly depending on the age of the child. And then the last one, like, I want to be safe, but I also want to take risks. And, all human beings to some extent, if they're going to move forward in their life, it means taking risks. You may be, Katie has decided she's going to leave her current job and go into business for herself because it's what she's always wanted and it will fulfill her. There's a risk. But she wants to be safe because she wants a regular paycheck. She has to decide, do I swing my arm to the next part of the jungle gym or do I just hang where I'm safe? Well, those things happen every day, but they're all dialectics. And if we're able to navigate the middle ground between them, where we're balancing emotional mind, which is EI, and rational mind, which is more IQ. If we can balance those two and ebb and flow them in the most productive way possible, we're going to make much better choices about everything, and life starts to stabilize. But here's the problem, is many of the people we work with, it was a fundamental of borderline personality disorder, but we found out now it's a fundamental more of a much wider range of individuals when they're struggling, which is that people tend to, when they're in a place where they're struggling, they tend to bounce from one end of the continuum to the other, not navigate the middle ground. So they're always at the most extreme end, one way or the other. And whenever you're at the most extreme end, you're probably not in the right place. So they're bouncing back and forth, and all because both of the extreme ends are very laden with uncontrolled emotionality. And I don't know about you, but I do not make good decisions in my life when I'm in that hyper emotional state. When rational mind is, I've sent it off to take a vacation and emotion rules. It doesn't work well. And so let me just show this couple and see if this resonates with you before we take a stretch. So can people see if you read straight across? These are dialectics. So can you see as if you read straight across where both of the two things could be present in a person psychologically at the same time? A time where a person feels a sense of hopelessness and a sense of hopefulness at the same time, where they want safety, but they feel threat at the same time. They have a loss of energy, but they also want to desire joy, but that takes energy to do that. Where they, want to feel safety, but they also want to feel freedom at the same time. And in most cases, that means giving up some of the safety stuff. So these dialectics are present at the same time in the person. And if they are going to become less and less productive if their way of dealing with it is jumping back and forth from discrete end to discrete end. If they learn to navigate the middle ground, that's when they're much more likely to have much more productivity. Look at these. Anybody who's ever been in a relationship with anybody in your relationships be able to relate to feeling both ends of the spectrum at the same time? This is the definition of relationships, folks. Is that that the more you love someone, the more they can give you massively strong emotions, both positive or negative, depending on how things are going. If you bounce back and forth between the two discrete ends, that's probably a relationship that either both people need to get into therapy or it's not the right one. But if it's one where as you're moving back and forth, there are times where you feel more of one end than the other, but then you're able to right size yourself to the middle ground because you've got the skills. That's how most relationships work. And it's like, you're veering a little bit too far to the right, but you got the skills and it pulls you back to middle ground. And then at some other point, it's a little more to the left, but no, you go back and forth. That's normative. That's pretty much present in any relationships we have with people we love, whether it's friends or children or spouses or partners or, parents. That's how it is. But if we can't navigate the middle ground and you bounce back and forth, it becomes destructive to everybody in the process. So, and here's the last one. And so when you look at these, this is how sometimes it plays out, so the person is going back and forth between this innate desire to live and survive because there's hopefulness, but then this innate desire to die because it will alleviate the pain. Those kinds of things. This is when the oppositional process that's emotion-based, that's the EI, becomes thinking. And after thinking, folks, is behavior. We're now in the danger zone when it goes into thinking and then it goes into behavior. And that's why we really want to focus a lot on promoting EI skills, because if we can connect with these dialectics while it's still at the emotion level, we can stop it at its earliest level before it becomes into thinking and then behavior. And we can help people with that navigation of the middle ground at the least risky point, not trying to then divert people back when it's most risky. And this is the most risky, folks. Look at these. I'm lonely. Leave me alone. That's extremely dangerous. I need you. I see you as worthless. Also dangerous. There's no stability there, folks. And if this is the thinking, where does behavior go from there? It goes into very dangerous places. So we want to catch it at emotion. And that's EI. What we've been talking about. All right. So why don't you go for a stretch, and I'll see you at 5 after 3. And then we're going to do a little bit more DBT before we leave.
Yeah.
Getting thrown out because of the storm. I appreciate your diligence and popping back on. So, all right. So let's go where we left off and talk a little bit more about DBT before our time together ends. All right. Oops. Sorry, I reconfigured you guys wrong. There we go. All righty. So let's talk a little bit about, so when we're looking at DBT as a whole, what we've got is this issue of this, everything is pretty much based on dialectics. And so we looked at some of the other ones. This one is a dialectic as well, which is this idea of blame versus problem solving. And that was a little bit what I was talking about with within the EI, where I said, so I make a mistake and then I say to myself, whoa, I really blew that. And so where I go with that and what I do with that is, pretty significant. So in terms of how I manage the process. So if I come at it from a blaming stance, inherently the interpretation, either internally for myself or how I think other people think about me, is that somehow I screwed up. And that says something about me as a person, about my quality, my skill set as a person, versus I made a mistake, which is a whole different thing. And so DBT really focuses on, in many cases, people are coming into our offices and they're on the first kind of teeter-totter here, where the first response to everything is blame, and it's self-deprecating blame. That's, I think, the really important point, is it's self-deprecating, that somehow any mistake the person makes is about a deficit in them, not that they just simply made a mistake. And so in DBT, one of the good things is that it works on is offsetting and really trying to minimize blame, and maximize problem solving. But by minimizing blame, we're not talking about minimizing responsibility. All right. So blame comes with a value judgment. Responsibility just is, yeah, I did it. That, maybe I made a wrong choice. Maybe I made not a particularly good choice. But it doesn't come with a landslide of value judgment, self-deprecation, those kinds of things. So this is a big part of DBT, is to change teeter-totter number 1 or dialectic number 1 into dialectic number 2. And I think that I see that happen a lot, where people will use the words blame and responsibility as if they're interchangeable, and they're very, very different. Responsibility just says, yeah, I'm saying that I made the choice, good, bad, or indifferent. Blame comes with it, as, well, you can, how often do people say, well, you can blame me? Those kinds of things. And that comes with a different feel to it. And that's what's trying to be changed in DBT through this overall. And so we do that by helping people learn how to navigate that middle ground and make choices that are less likely to bring that self-deprecation with them. So when you look at some of these, just if you think of these dialectics, I'm sure they'll make sense to you. So the idea of like skill enhancement versus self-acceptance. All right. So are there skills that you can think of that you just don't have, will never have? And no matter how hard you work on it, there's no way that that's going to be something you're skillful in. Can everybody think about some of those? Yeah, I can make a list that's long enough that I could do it on a roll of toilet paper. There's always going to be ton more of skills that just, they're not in my bailiwick. They're not, so one of the dialectics is the difference between giving up too soon to something you do have the ability to build a skill in versus self-acceptance of saying, this just isn't my strong point. Now, unfortunately, with folks that we're working with, in many cases, the skill enhancements that they give up on are the ones that are the EI ones, the ones that are about, empathy and managing emotions and interacting appropriately with people and, those kinds of things. And when you give up on those too easily, what ends up happening is your relationships tend to all be problematic, or most of them. Problem solving versus problem acceptance. There are some things we can solve. There are some things, and one of the main key phrases in DBT is it is what it is. So there are some things, it just is what it is. It's not going to change. That's the way it is. That's acceptance. Problem solving is this something realistically that if you do something different or you work on it, the outcome will be different? If so, keep doing it. And then emotion regulation versus tolerance, which is a very difficult one. Because emotion regulation is really about responding reasonably to things versus tolerance or lack of tolerance, which is drawing very significant boundaries that say this is a line you cannot cross. And helping people understand that, because a lot of times people take the emotionality of having their feelings hurt and make anything that hurts their feelings one of the ones that is about tolerance or lack of tolerance. And life happens, when you put two people in a room together at some point in time, probably somebody's going to say something that's going to hurt the other person's feelings, not with any intention. It just happens. And so if your boundaries are too rigid, what you end up is not allowing for the human process of relationships, which is going to include, in most cases, discomfort and sometimes pain and emotional, ups and downs. But that's the reality of it. You can't filter that out by setting so many boundaries, because then you don't have a relationship anymore. You're not allowing the other person to be a fallible human being, and we have to do that. So all of that's DBT, and when you think about it, folks, all of that stuff is really uncomfortable, particularly, and very complicated, particularly if you haven't been taught any of it, from a young age on up. You're coming into somebody's office, your life is kind of falling apart around you. And then in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, all of a sudden there's all these skill sets that most people have, maneuvered through, fallen on their rear end, gotten back up, brushed themselves off, tried it again, went through maturation, improved their skill sets as they, grew older. A lot of our clients never had that because they never had anybody in their life to help them with that. And some of the biggest ones with our clients are things like self-efficacy versus asking for help. When should I be having the goal to stand on my own 2 feet, no matter how hard the struggle is? And when should I be asking for help? Because I won't learn skills or move forward in my competence without asking somebody to help me with it. Independence versus dependence. There's always going to be times in most people's lives where there's going to be some level of dependence on other people. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as it's balanced with a sense of independence in other areas, it's as long as you can navigate the middle ground. And this one is a big one, transparency versus privacy. Transparency is telling the truth. Privacy is about things that you don't talk about because you choose not to. You can have both of those. You just have to navigate them. One of the places I tell people all the time to be very mindful of this is at 12-step meetings. I'm a huge proponent of 12-step meetings. I've worked a program for over 30 years myself. So I absolutely support 12 steps 100%, the program, but the program is made up of people. And people have all the same problems, whether they're in 12-step meetings or not. You can be sober 25, 30 years and still have a lot of issues. And 12-step program meetings, I hate to say it, but it's true. There are many times where they're very similar to actually what happens at church a lot, which is while everybody's in church, everybody loves each other and everybody's, we're all in this together. And then you walk out into the parking lot and then it's, did you see Jennifer's shirt? It didn't match her pants. And did you see Katie, what she was wearing? Oh my God, I can't believe she would wear that to church. And, Marcy brought those cookies, but they were really dry. That happens at 12-step meetings all the time too. Everybody is, loving each other, hugging each other, supporting each other, which is probably true in the moment. And then they go out into the parking lot and the more human part of them takes over and some of that other stuff takes over. So I tell people all the time, when you go to 12-step meetings, because you're in the room doesn't mean you disclose everything in an open arena. There are some things you talk to at meetings, and there's some things you only talk to your sponsor about. That's the difference between privacy and transparency. And there's a lot of those things. There's some things that you talk to your psychiatrist about, or your psychologist about, or your therapist about that you'll never tell anybody in your personal life. That's fine. But there's a difference there. And that's another dialectic. As I said, we're surrounded by them in our everyday life. But the great thing about DBT, which is one of the reasons that I was really drawn to it, and I really feel I practice it because I think it is a really equitable and fair way of working with people, is that DBT says people are doing their best and they also want to do better. All right. DBT is all about both and. People may not have caused their own problems, but they have to solve them. People must learn new behaviors in different situations in their lives in order to improve the quality of their life. And your life is painful if you're living it feeling suicidal, depressed, anxious, and angry. And there is no absolute truth. There's always more than one way to look at a problem, and there's always more than one way to solve it. That, the perfect example that's used for that one all the time is the 5 people that are standing there and see a car accident. And then the police come along and get everybody's statements. And we now have, that Kelly says the car was dark brown. Rick says it's dark blue. Tanya said it was dark green. Priscilla said it was this rust color. Melissa said it's this burgundy color. Kelly says it was going 15 miles an hour. Tanya said it was going 35 miles an hour. That's that piece, is that the truth tends to live somewhere in that middle ground. It's often seeking it is very challenging. So as we talked about, there's 4 skill sets. They parallel the EI ones very much. So mindfulness is about focusing in the moment. And paying attention to what the issue is at hand versus getting distracted by a lot of other things. Distress tolerance is about being able to manage situations that are uncomfortable without knee-jerk reacting, without relying on your limbic system, to make the decisions and being impulsive. Emotion regulation is when there's, these pretty intensive mood changes and how to stabilize them in the middle ground. And interpersonal effectiveness is that ability about the compassion and the empathy, and also being able to say no and set appropriate boundaries with people so that they're not encroaching on what is, the healthiest and the best for you. Very parallel to what we saw with EI. But so this is that piece that's all about the middle ground. And the middle ground is all about this idea, the middle path. So now what we have is, I'm going to go to the large screen. So what we have here on the middle path is we have Melanie, and Melanie is walking down the hallway where she works. And while she's walking down the hallway, what ends up happening is that, let's see here, who have I not used as an example? Jessica. So Jessica's walking down the hallway, and Jessica's like looking down at the floor, and she's walking down the hallway, and seems like she's like kind of talking to herself. And Melanie says, "Hi, Jessica." But Jessica keeps walking by the way she did. And so now Melanie's response to that is, well, what the hell is her problem? I haven't done anything to Jessica. I said hi to her and she was completely rude to me. She walked by, she pretended like I wasn't even there, and she just kept, somehow mumbling to herself and just kept walking on like I didn't exist. So you know what? She's going to treat me like that and be disrespectful. Well, you know what? That's it. I'm not going to be respectful either. So the reality of the fact is I'm not going to talk to her anymore. I'm not going to sit next to her at staff meetings and things like that. If that's the kind of person she is, I'm done with her. Well, so Melanie, so you come in and you give me this description, in a therapy session. And I say, well, that's one interpretation. But did you take the time to think about there being any other interpretations of what happened? And your response is, well, there's no other interpretation. She walked right by me. She ignored me. She didn't say anything to me. And, she had this look on her face. And so like, what other interpretation could there be? And I say, well, I don't know. I guess that if I couldn't think of another interpretation and I had never had a negative interaction with Jessica before, one of the things I might want to do before I make a decision like that is I might want to find out if it's a possibility, because I can't think of everything. So I said, maybe, what might have been a good idea is to go find Jessica and say, hey, Jessica, I saw you in the hallway and said hi, but it was like I didn't think you saw me. So I just wanted to check in, see if you're okay. And Melanie at first is grumbling and grousing. Well, I don't think I should have to go and talk to her first. She was the one that was rude to me. I didn't do anything to her, okay. See, that's emotional dysregulation. That's interpersonal ineffectiveness. That's not being mindful. That's like the opposite of all the skills. And I say to Melanie, because she's been working with me for a while, well, I understand the immediacy of your emotion, but if you're looking in the big picture, what would your wise mind say? And at that point in time, if Melanie's been working with DBT for a while, she would say, well, it would say that I should check it out before I react to it. And I say, yeah. So if you don't want to go talk to her, like, what's a way you can do that? And she's like, nah, I'll go talk to her. So then, Melanie, you come into your next session rather sheepishly and start talking about something completely different. And I say, wait. Before we switch topics, let's start up where we left off last time. What happened with Jessica? Did you go talk to her? Well, yes, I did. Did you work stuff out? Yeah, I did. So what happened? Well, it was a big misunderstanding. Well, tell me more. Because now you're trying to scoot out of the way, Melanie, of really having to practice that DBT skill. And so I said, so tell me exactly what happened when you talked to her. And she said, well, so Melanie says to me, well, I went and talked to her and I kind of said what you said. And what she told me was that, oh my God, Melanie, I didn't even see you. I was on my way to work. I had a flat tire. I had a blowout on the road. It was really dangerous. I barely got the car into the parking lot. And I was thinking about having to call AAA, to come and repair the tire because otherwise I can't get home this afternoon. And I didn't even see you. I'm so sorry. So now we're going to go back, Melanie, and we're going to talk about, so let's talk about across the 4 skills, when you manage them appropriately in a situation with Jessica, and when maybe you could have made better choices. And this is where we're going back, and what I always call it with people is a post-mortem. We go back and, resurrect what happened and say, what could you do definitely next time? And that's how you learn about that. But it's tied for Melanie with the skills. So it would be, so let's start out with mindfulness, first of all. What could you have done differently in the hallway to be more effective in terms of mindfulness? And she's at that point in time going to say, well, I could have taken in I could have been more observant about what was going on with Jessica. I could have really thought more about, is this the way she usually interacts with me? Have we ever had a problem like this before? Because mindfulness is what sets the tone for how Melanie filters everything else. Now, if you had practiced mindfulness there, Melanie, probably what would have happened is you would have never spun out to the rest of it, because the mindfulness would have corrected you right off the bat. And you probably would have gone after her and said, hey, what's going on, Jessica? Can I help? But as soon as your mindfulness started to spin, it takes everything else with it. And that's why with DBT, folks, mindfulness is the grounding agent. So when we talk in DBT about helping a person get grounded, it would be just that. It's about getting them back into a mindful state, because once they are back in the mindful state, it changes the way they filter everything else. And then that's what's going to allow you, Melanie, to say, well, in interpersonal effectiveness, I kind of really spun out because I've never had a problem with Jessica before. We've always gotten along, and I didn't give her the benefit of the doubt. Instead of it, I jumped right to the way other people in my past have always treated me, and I judged her through the eyes of what other people have done to me, which is not fair. That would be the conversation, Melanie, you and I would be having, and we would go through all 4 of the skills using that one experience as the example. Because Jessica, if Melanie didn't talk to you anymore, and then every time you went to a staff meeting for the couple days after that, she got up and changed chairs so she wasn't sitting next to you, would that have been an uncomfortable scenario, do you think? Yes. And Jessica's left not having any idea why at that point in time. But so that's why I said to you, the reason for the EI skills is because that's exactly what I was saying to Melanie. If Melanie started just from, this isn't the way it usually is between myself and Jessica, and started her grounding skills in mindfulness long before she flew into whatever else she was doing, and is writing Jessica off, she would have regrounded herself. And that's what Melanie has to learn. That's what DBT is about, is because ultimately somebody who practices DBT and really changes the kind of the quality of their life is somebody who really learns how to get themselves into the grounding place, because that's how you get back to wise mind, is, grounding first, wise mind second, is how that works. So Melanie, you get an A+ for after the fact effort, around a C for in the moment effort. How about that? But there's, as we said, always room for improvement. So that looks like this, folks. And this is the heart and soul of DBT, which is this is how people have to think about it if it's going to work for them. So wise mind is always the goal, which is a balance of reasonable mind and emotional mind. The other 2 minds you want to stay out of because they do not lead you to a reasonable outcome. So reasonable mind, that sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds like, hey, we want everybody to have reasonable mind. Well, no, not in DBT. Because reasonable mind is all facts and logic. It's like, as I said, it's like working with Spock or Data, depending on what generation you're in, from Star Trek. I mean, it's all logic. It's pre-programmed. It's, there's no emotion in it at all. We don't want to be on that end either. And then there's emotional mind, which is all emotion, no logic. It's the wise mind piece here. That's the middle ground. And the middle path is what we always seek. And that's here. So it's about, the middle path is always about finding the balance between acceptance and change. So what parts about me do I need to accept and what parts do I need to change? So hopefully Melanie, through what she found out from what she just did, is she found a number of things that she needs to change in those situations. Maybe that she gets overreactive. So some ideas of the dialectic in this, in the middle ground. I'm fine as I am, but I also need to change. I understand your opinion, but I disagree with it. All different points of view about a situation are partially true, partially false. And the last one, I don't have all the truth, so I need to be open to what others have to say. So it's really about having that fluidity of finding that middle path and navigating it, rather than believing that the way we initially perceive something is the way it is. Because that's when we make a lot of mistakes as human beings, is believing that the way we see it is the way it is. And so the most important piece on this is validation. And I gave you pieces of each of I gave you slides that reinforce what I told you about all the other skills earlier on when we were talking about EI. But validation is when I'm going to stop share so we can look at it. If you had, this is not a DBT thing, this is in general. If you had to pick only one skill, and you could only use one skill in your work, the one that you're going to want to pick 100% of the time because it has by far the highest correlation to helping people change is validation. Validation, validation, validation. You can throw everything out, and if you are a good validator, you will help make change in another person just with that one skill. That is proven by research study after research study after research study. Validation is not validating you agree with the person. That's where people get a little utsy. Is they think, well, I'm supporting them in their problematic behavior. No, you're not. What you're doing, and it has to be truthful, folks. If it's not truthful, it will not work. So if you can't say this and it's not the truth, then don't do validation, do something else. Because what you're validating is that you can understand through their experience why they see the situation the way they do. That's what you're validating. All right. So let's see here. What we have is, so Lynn comes in to see me and she's starting to have some problems with symptom return because she's off her meds. And I say to her, why aren't you taking your meds? How long has it been since you took your medication? And she said, I haven't had it for 3 days. And I say, well, why? And she said, because I went to the psychiatrist's office to meet with him and get the medication, and he was running 20 minutes late. And I said, well, did you have somewhere more important to be? Because your medications are a priority. And she said, no, I just decided I was done with it because they have all these rules there about the fact that clients have to be on time. And if we're not on time, then there's this consequence and that consequence and that consequence. But the psychiatrist is always running behind. And so I just decided I wasn't going to tolerate it because it was disrespectful and I left. Okay, Lynn, I believe it is disrespectful. I believe you have every right to address that. But I do not believe that walking out when you need medication and your conduit to the medication is the psychiatrist, and what would have made the difference is that you waited a couple more minutes. That's not grounded. That's not reasonable. All right. But because I do genuinely understand how frustrating and disrespectful it must feel to have those two sets of rules. I can genuinely say to you, Lynn, I absolutely understand if from your perspective, how it felt very disrespectful and how you were tired of being disrespected. So there's the validation. All right. But here's the thing. Validation is always done validation and pivot. The pivot is the treatment part. So I'm going to say completely genuinely to Lynn what I just did, which is that I can completely understand how that could have felt incredibly disrespectful to you and that it could make you very angry, that you felt like there were two sets of rules. However, let's look at some other ways that you could have handled that and still had your medication. That's validation, pivot, validation, pivot. So what it does is it validates the place that she's in because I can agree with her. But then the pivot is the problem solving. Because otherwise, I can sit here and talk all day with Lynn about the problem with the psychiatrist and how rude that is and disrespectful and let's call NAMI and all that other kind of stuff. But the reality of the fact is that Lynn leaves and she still doesn't have any medication and she doesn't have a different way of thinking about it. So the validation and pivot piece, that is the most effective intervention for helping a person change their behavior, overall. And so it's a very important one to remember, but it only works, as I said, if you can see through their perspective. It doesn't mean you think it's right, but if you know what they've gone through around a certain situation and you can say, well, if I were in their shoes, I can see how they see it that way. So as soon as you can do that, then you can honestly validate. But what do they call it if you do that and you don't believe it? What's the word if you don't believe it? It rhymes with validate, but it causes a lot of negative responses. No, nobody knows what it is. You should know what it is.
Enabling?
Nope, it rhymes with validate. Oh, now Lorena, we have to start all over again. I'm going back to slide number 1. No.
Oh, no, I don't know if my battery will last that long.
We'll be done at midnight. Get a snack. So the word is placate. All right. If it's genuine, it's validate. If it's non-genuine, it's placate. And clients know the minute you're placating, and then it goes bad fast. So you only validate. And as I said, it's not about agreeing. It's that you can see it through their lens. The moment you can see it through their lens, then validating is genuine. But if you can't, then don't do it. But if you can see it through their lens, then use it a lot, because it is by far, as I said, the most effective, because the person feels heard and the person feels supported in their perspective. Although you're not telling them their perspective's right, they feel supported, that you hear their perspective and you're supporting them, that they have a right to have that perspective. And then you're offering an alternative that might resolve the problem. That's win-win-win, folks. People don't usually turn that down because it's win-win-win. Placating, though, clients will pick it up in 30 seconds and then that's it. You're dead in the water, because then they'll be all over you, because you'll become the new enemy in the moment. So you don't want to do that. So validate. Okay. All right. So we have one last thing and then we're done for the day. Right. So I gave you examples of each of the different skills for you to use with folks, but sorry about that. So I gave you a cheat sheet for each one of the skills. Oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm forgetting. There we go. Evidently, I'm not in a very much sharing mood today. So let me show you these. So for each of them, so this is the piece that has been being interwoven all day, and I gave you some handouts about it, so you can go back and refer them. So this gives you the DBT by individual skill sets, and each one of these is the skill sets underneath them. If you haven't had DBT, had a DBT class, I would really strongly recommend it, because they'll do the whole class on teaching you practical application of all the skill sets. And those can be very, very helpful, but I gave them all to you here so you know what they are. And then I gave you cheat sheets on what the different skills are. So we just talked about mindfulness, which keeps you grounded in the moment. It's what allows you to be able to figure out the middle path. And so the mindfulness skills are observing, describing, and participating in the moment as it is. So with Melanie, what I did when I worked with her is helped her do an exercise to go back and relive what she lived in the hallway, but in a mindful way, honestly, observing, describing, and participating as it happened without judgment. And mindfulness, the thing you always want to remember about mindfulness, folks, is mindfulness is a no judgment zone. All right. So you'll see how the non-judgmentally, it's just observing and experiencing what's happening around you. And this is a handout for your clients. I gave you a handout for your clients. And this is the skill set. This is another handout for your clients. So all of these are for mindfulness, for you to be able to work with other people on it. And then this is distress tolerance, the kinds of things that promote distress, and then how to teach people when they have to change something versus when you have to tolerate it. In life, you get a lot of things thrown at you that you don't have the capacity to change, but it helps people identify behaviors in both emotion regulation and distress tolerance that they're likely to do impulsively, that limbic system piece again, versus mindfully, which is the frontal lobe. So here we have this is for a handout for your clients. And what it does is it explains where dysregulation comes from and how the cycle happens. And it talks about why the benefits of learning emotion regulation and how that, will help them along the way. So I wanted to give you a lot of things for clients that you can use. Here's your emotion regulation cheat sheet of the things we talked about earlier that you can refer back to. And here's an emotion regulation worksheet for your clients. So for each one of the 4 that we have talked about throughout the day, I've given you a cheat sheet for you to return to and a handout for the clients as well. And this is part of emotion regulation. This is the cheat sheet for the clients, things that they can do to calm themselves down when they're feeling dysregulated. And then this is distress tolerance. This is your cheat sheet. And here's all the skills in the upper right. So as I said, if you can find, good solid DBT class at the the full day is around DBT and the DBT skills, I would strongly recommend that, because partnering and learning the skills is really helpful with the EI too. And here's the cheat sheet for the clients. So you have those for everybody. And then interpersonal effectiveness, your cheat sheet about everything, and the client's cheat sheet for everything. So you have that connection and that partnering there. And so it's important for us to remember that DBT in general is born out of working with people that have long-term crisis situations that they've been living in. And so their reactions, dysregulation, ineffectiveness, lack of mindfulness, are all ways that they've learned to cope with that crisis place that they have been in. Most people have been raised in either trauma-filled or at the very least invalidating environments where they didn't have the support mechanisms there to teach them the skills they need to function more effectively. And so DBT fills that in and backfills the skills that they didn't have to start with. And one of the big ones that is really helpful for people is distractions. And when you think about it, I love this part that they talk about because distractions are kind of used everywhere now. You go into a restaurant and they give you the basket of bread. In waiting rooms now at doctor's offices, there's TVs there to watch. All of those things, teaching people to use distractions slows them down so they can focus on the skills. And that's what you really want to set them a groundwork of. When you start to feel dysregulated, before you start to try to practice any of your skills or even look at the emotional intelligence, what you need to do first is kind of reground yourself, and distractions are used to do that. So I gave you these. These are this is a sheet for the clients. And these are all examples of distractions they can use to get themselves grounded. And when you look at what happened with the EI that I gave you, you'll see under the improve the imagery when I was talking to you about all of the pictures there. Oh, my neighbors decided to let their dogs out. It's probably the first time in 2 days with all the rain. Sorry. And so all of these are things that people can use to get themselves to a place where they're pulling themselves out of their distress long enough then to focus on the skills moving forward, which is really helpful. So this is really good for the clients. And so here you have your EI, and here you have your conflict resolution skills. So once again, that EI overlapping all of the different parts of DBT, and they're really, really make it a really good and strong links in a chain, in terms of helping people get regrounded, and much more effective in managing their life so they don't have to go to these extremes of emotional pain and suffering. They really partner really well. And this is what I always end with because I think it speaks to what I was talking about before. So this is dogs can identify chemical pheromones. That's my brain chemistry orientation that we as humans cannot smell, taste, or touch. For they're human, they can therefore assist in many ways, including if their emotional state begins to change. The dog will react in a certain manner to assist in helping their human regain emotional balance. And that's all biochemical, folks. And that's the process is biochemical, and some of the answer is going to be biochemical. And so when we look at that piece, helping people to understand that, and I think this is the main grounding of both DBT and emotional intelligence, is that if you can understand that part of what you're driven by is triggers external to you, and part of what you're driven by is the biochemical reaction to those, that the sooner you can quiet the biochemistry, the more you're going to be able to make reasonable decisions. We do that non-behaviorally with medication. Think about how many, with antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers for both bipolar disorder. We use medication to try to stabilize the biochemistry of the mental health disorders. We use MATs to stabilize the biochemistry of addiction. This is about emotion and behavior. We don't have medication to stabilize emotion and behavior, nor do I think we want it, because we want to have the freedom to express emotions and to act in ways that are of our choice, as long as they're within a range that is not problematic for us or other people. And so that means skill set. But part of that skill set is we have to be able to ameliorate or stabilize the initial biochemical rush. And EI and DBT are the two most effective things to do that, because the moment the person feels that rush, the moment they feel they're not in that middle ground, that's when those skills come in. And the skills are all emotional intelligence based, but then they're segmented in the 4 different areas of DBT. And I think that's the part that is so important overall. And I end with telling you this. This was a situation that was handed over to me, where a young person in one of the treatment centers that I consulted at was waiting for his mom to come and visit at the treatment center. First time that he would have seen his mom in 5 years. And she promised that she would come for visiting day. And she didn't. And they called me in on an emergency call. I wasn't even on duty that day. I was on call, and they called me in, and I arrived at the hospital, and they called me in because he was off in a corner sitting on his bed facing the wall in a darkened room with a razor blade slicing his wrists little by little by little. And they called me in to defuse that process. And so I was probably there well over an hour before I got him to hand over the razor blade. And when I got up and I was walking him out of the rooms to try to, I was taking him somewhere else so that he could, kind of get some food and those kinds of things, because he had been sitting there for a while. One of the staff members came up to me and said, "Oh my God, Mary Kay, you probably should go to the ladies' room." And I said, "Why? What's the matter?" And she said, "Well, go in and look." And when I went into the ladies' room, literally all the makeup from my face had come off my face, because I had been crying while I was working with him. And trying to get the razor blade away from him, because I'm sitting there with someone who is one gash away from potentially killing himself. And I'm the one responsible for hopefully helping him to see it in a different way. When you see someone get to that point, I hope none of you ever have to go through that. But when you do, if you do, it will change your entire perspective about the fact that we need to catch people at ground zero. Because once they go off of ground zero and they take that first step, you never know how fast they will escalate from that. You may not get a chance to do the in-between stuff. And emotional intelligence and DBT is all about backing it up as far as you possibly can, to giving as much latitude for safety as is possible. And when we're working with the people that we are that are in the amount of pain they are in, that acceleration can be extraordinarily quick. And I work with people that are actively suicidal all the time. But this, being in that dark room, not being able to see very much what was happening with him, while he had a straight razor to his wrist and he had already cut it open many times before I even got into the room. You learn something about finding the ways to de-escalate emotionality as fast as possible. And right now, emotional intelligence and DBT are probably the two most effective. So, that's well worth being skilled in. Doesn't mean you have to use them every minute of every day, but they're great to have in your toolkit. Because I think they're probably the only way I got through that with that young man was those were the skills I used, to try to get him out of that arena. So, as I said, whatever practice or building you can get with those two, they'll come in handy someday, even if you don't use them every day. So I feel badly because I feel like I'm sending you out into the great abyss that we just went through with all the rain and all that other kind of stuff. So if you're not home, be safe getting there. If you are home, I hope you keep your power, and that it passes over you relatively unharmful. But if not, and it gets bad, call me and I can do a DBT session with you over the phone. We can emotionally regulate you through the storm. So have a wonderful holiday season. Hopefully I'll see you after the new year, when the new classes are posted. But until then, please be safe, happy, and healthy. And be very careful in the storm. You don't want to see anybody get hurt. All right. Take care, everybody.